Let's move then to this story of illegal migration. London apparently is home to as many as 585,000 illegal migrants. That's the equivalent of 1 in 12 of the capital's population. This was a previously confidential report. The new estimate has emerged in a study commissioned by Thames Water, raising concerns on pressure being placed on public services such as schools and the NHS. On Tuesday, the Home Office confirmed 1,000 migrants had crossed the Channel this year, following 38,816 in 2024, the second highest record on total. There is clearly a big issue in this area. Let's in a moment we'll speak to Mihnea Cuibus, a researcher at the Migrant Observatory. First, Charles Hymas, Home Affairs Editor at the Telegraph. Charles, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Any idea, firstly, why this previous report was confidential? I mean, I can guess, but is there an official reason?
There's no official reason except that it was something that was part of a process by Thames Water, essentially to establish the potential demand within London. And one of the things that they couldn't establish, or they needed to establish, was how many irregular migrants are there who may be using their services. And so therefore that's why they commissioned it. And clearly that sort of thing is potentially sensitive, but we obtained it under freedom of information legislation.
What a curious way that a stat like that can come out from Thames. I thought it was a typo when I first read it this morning. Thames Water, how on earth, what are they doing involved in this? But it makes perfect sense, and this is the upshot. So we now know this incredible amount of people that are illegal. It could be up to 585,000. That's, I guess, the extreme end of possibility. Is that right?
Yes, so they've got a very broad range. At the low end, you're talking about 390,000, and in the middle, just under 500,000. So you're probably, it is around 500,000 according to their estimation.
Do we know anything about the backgrounds of people? There's a temptation to say, and some would say being generous, overstayers on visas and things like that. Would that be an example of many of these people?
I think the main numbers that they say account for this figure are overstayers, people who arrive on a legal visa and then overstay their time. Then obviously there are others who are failed asylum seekers. Then there's also, if you've seen all those stories about criminals who have been they're facing deportation, but then use the human rights legislation in order to fight and appeal, and therefore remain in the country. So they're included within those figures as well.
In terms of getting by as an illegal immigrant, I mean, that is, I would suggest, quite tricky, yeah? I mean, we can all imagine, well, I could spend, cash rather than have a bank account, I'll try not to show any ID. But, we live in a world where it's quite hard to get through a year, for example, without ever being asked to produce some identification.
I think there's a cash economy which is operating. There's a suggestion of it. The Home Office is doing a lot of work at the moment in terms of enforcement action on sort of black market companies which employ people to do work, and also one of the big concerns they've had, and there's been various raids on it, is the delivery drivers, and these companies which are sort of the dot economy, yeah, which is essentially cash in hand and therefore drops below the radar and is not picked up. And that's how they survive.
Yeah. I don't suppose for one second the Mayor of London has made a response to this. It's not really in his DNA to do so, but has there been any government response to these figures?
The government has basically made the point that it is it has introduced various measures in order to try and return people. They've got their border security command, and obviously they're trying to tackle the flow of illegal migrants coming into the UK. And they make the point that they've returned a record number of people, the highest for at least 5 years, back to their home countries after they were found to have no right to stay in the UK. But equally, they're also sort of saying that they don't necessarily accept the numbers. And clearly there are no official counts. Yet we've had cases in the past where former Home Office officials and senior figures have estimated figures of around 1 million illegal migrants in the UK. Yeah. So I think there's a general acceptance that it's around that sort of area.
Charles, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Charles Hymas, Home Affairs Editor over there at the Telegraph. Thank you to him. Let's speak to Mihnea Cuibus, researcher at the Migrant Observatory. Mihnea, good afternoon to you. Let's take the kind of highest possible figure there, 508, let's say 500,000. Has it always been like that? I mean, has there always been a contingent, a group of people that are not fully documented, whether they're overstayers, whether they tried to apply for citizenship or asylum and failed? Has that figure always existed? We've just never really officially seen it.
Good afternoon, Ian. Thanks for having me. Now, look, the real answer and the short answer here is just we simply don't know. So this estimate that came out today is exactly that. It's just another estimate that's come. We've had a number of these estimates coming in over the years. In fact, the one we're hearing about today is based on another estimate from 2017, which put numbers at 800,000 to 1.2 million. But in all of these estimates, there's a lot of uncertainty. And in fact, we don't have any data and we don't have any way of telling how accurate any of these estimates are. And I believe that's the real issue at hand, the fact that we just don't have enough data to be able to say much about these estimates, be they larger or smaller.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to roll over on this one, but is there a sense that if you went to Paris or Berlin, New York, you would kind of see, there's always going to be some people who don't have the legal right to be in that country? Is that just the way of the brave new world we live in?
I mean, look, across the world, countries are struggling with this issue. Pretty much every major Western country does have a significant unauthorized migrant population. And the reason for that is that it's really, really difficult to do anything about it, because as Charles mentioned earlier, a lot of these people are in fact are not coming here illegally, but in fact are coming here with a legal visa, and then a lot of them might end up overstaying. Yeah. And it's very difficult for states here in the UK and elsewhere to actually keep track of any of them.
Yeah, and then we live in a world that doesn't feel particularly safe sometimes. And whilst I don't think anybody would say just because you overstayed your visa, therefore you're a kind of violent criminal or something like that. I've never subscribed to that. That's daft. But quite clearly, in a world where we kind of need to know who's around, I mean, there is a security issue, a serious security issue around this.
I mean, look, one point where I would push back on this is not a new issue at all. So if we look back to the 20th century, so for example, back in 1986, Ronald Reagan had to implement a massive regularization program in the U.S. At the time, and countries have been struggling with this issue for decades, and I don't believe it's anything new in that sense. But again, it's really hard to say how it's evolved over time without having any serious data behind it.
In terms of what can be done about this, I mean, I don't know over there at the Migrant Observatory whether you have a line on that at all. It's hard to know, but what's the answer? I mean, is this down to the ineptitude of local authorities and governments? Who's responsible?
I think there's a few points here. There's no easy answer. There never is with these issues. But it's important to remember that it's not like we're not doing anything with regards to these things. So if we think back 10 years ago to the time of Theresa May being Home Secretary and the hostile environment policy, there's a lot of measures in place trying to tackle this issue. Migrants that don't have a legal right to be in the UK actually face a lot of restrictions, as you mentioned earlier, on their right to work, on their right to rent, on their right to open a bank account and the like. And it's we have these measures in place, and it's very hard to see how we can move forward. Now, one thing that we've also heard the government talk about is this idea of ramping up deportations, ramping up returns to other countries. And there's a lot of agreement across the political spectrum that that's something that we need to do. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty of actually doing it in practice, practice, then it becomes a lot
of
more
course,
difficult.
I mean, there isn't the personnel to do it, apart from anything else. But I mean, we don't, by definition, we don't know who these people are, right?
Right. Now, there's a number of things that have been happening. So the Labour government, ever since coming in, they've made quite a bit about their efforts to raise returns. So you were talking about the lack of stuff. We've had more than 1,000 new employees put into immigration enforcement. There's been a number of measures here, but it's still way too early to tell if they're going to have an effect.
Mm. Well, we will speak again, I'm sure, maybe when Thames Water reveal another set of data. Who knows? But in the meantime, Mihnea, thank you. Mihnea Cuibus, a researcher at the Migrant Observatory.